I'm the other survivor that we usually don't hear about. Most people, if I were to tell you or someone else that my child never would have had life because of an abortion, most people would think that's because I was thinking about aborting her. But the reality of my daughter's life is that she wouldn't have had life because my own biological mother chose to end mine. That's the kind of survivor I am.
Tell me what the situation was of your biological mother at the time.
She was 19 years old, and she was a college student. She was unmarried, and what I've learned over the course of time is that she had dated my biological father for over 4 years before they became pregnant with me. And I always like to share that with people because I think sometimes people think abortions only take place in certain kinds of relationships. And what we know is that abortions take place in all sorts of committed relationships. People who have been together for decades, abortions still take place in those kind of relationships. And so they were unmarried, they were college students. I have no doubt they were scared to death about what they were going to do about me. I can only guess that maybe my mother felt like she didn't know how she could do it all. And of course I've learned over time that it was her own family, most likely her father, my grandfather, that coerced her into having the abortion.
In the summer of 1977, Melissa's mother was admitted to St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, with the intention of aborting her daughter. After acquiring her medical records years later, Melissa has been able to piece together the events of those early days. She found her entry into this world was anything but easy.
I was born on August 29th of 1977 after a 5-day onslaught of a saline infusion abortion. And for people who aren't aware of what that is, a saline infusion abortion actually involves injecting a caustic salt solution into the amniotic fluid that surrounds the fetus. And the intent of that salt solution is to scald the fetus to death from the outside in. And so over that 5-day period, I was subjected to that salt solution, and my biological mother was given rounds of Pitocin to induce her labor with me and ultimately dispel my dead body from her womb.
Jonathan Taylor is a doctor of osteopathy at Creighton University and currently practices family medicine in Sioux City, Iowa. As a former OB/GYN, Dr. Taylor has studied the effects and procedures of both early and late-term abortions. I talked with him to learn more about the devastating effects a late-term saline abortion has on a baby.
Melissa explained to us that she survived a saline infusion abortion or salt poison abortion. Can you tell us what that entails for her and the baby?
Cannot imagine the tissue destruction that must happen, what it does to the skin, the intestines, the lining on the inside of the baby, because the fluid goes into the stomach, and then a little bit that goes into the lungs. Unfortunately, in her case, did not severely destroy her lungs. Most babies that died were just basically scalded to death by a chemical reaction.
From the strong saline
salt solution that's very, very potent.
How long does it take for a baby to die then?
Over an hour, and there'd be convulsions, and the baby would usually die inside the mom, but like I said, they'd stop doing this one and switch to a different kind because too many of the babies were living, and they were calling them candy apple babies because the skin was just stripped off their body. It looked like an apple because it was just like scalding.
Now, when the baby's thrashing like that, would the mother feel that late in pregnancy then?
Absolutely.
So she knows that the baby is going through quite a bit of turmoil and trauma and anguish.
Correct. And she'd be having some pains too, because this is not going to be a happy event. Number one, she denied the person as a person. Number two, she's going through labor.
And then she vaginally delivers the baby, which the abortionist hopes is dead, correct?
Correct. The numbers of babies that lived made them change their tactics.
Surviving the effects of a saline abortion was a miracle in itself. Thinking they had just performed a successful abortion, the abortionists were in for a surprise when baby Melissa started moving. But still premature, Melissa was in need of intense medical care. Thankfully, a few nurses stepped in to save her life.
From what I've been told, they did leave me on the bedside table for dead, believing, obviously, that I should be dead. And they tended to my biological mother. And as they were caring for her, I started to make some small grunting noises and some movements, and the nurse stepped in and they started to provide me with that medical care.
So what was supposed to be an intended death turned around in a heartbeat, so to speak.
Absolutely.
What was your prognosis then during those first critical hours?
Pretty poor. Pretty poor, and even not just for those few hours, it was for days, it was for weeks, and literally I would say probably for years the prognosis was not good for my life. I weighed about 2 pounds and 14.5 ounces after I was born. I had jaundice, I had severe respiratory distress, I had seizures. There's a lot of information there about having lots of blood transfusions, that there were days where I was not doing well. But the doctors and nurses always stepped in and provided me with the medical care that I needed. And I owe my life to them. I really, truly do. There's lots of children like me, and we read it in the news every day, of another child like me who can survive, who has survived, and they aren't provided medical care at all, or not soon enough, and they aren't given the opportunity to have a life like I have.
It's such a horrific procedure that the baby undergoes, killing most of them. Of course, that's the intended purpose. To see you come out so apparently physically unscathed, are there any problems or repercussions that you deal with today?
I have very poor eyesight, which is pretty normal for children who are as premature as I was. So we can't say for sure that that's a result of the abortion attempt, just likely a premature birth complication. I have asthma, and again, that could be because of the prematurity and being on oxygen, or it could be something that is genetic for all I know. But those are really the only real major problems that I've had.
In Melissa's case, she now has asthma, which may or may not be attributed to the saline abortion. It's possible that the saline affected her lungs, as you mentioned. What other complications or problems would a survivor of this type of an abortion commonly experience?
Her case is extremely interesting in the fact that her asthma is probably genetic. It was probably her mom or her parents or somebody in her family had asthma, because if the saline had damaged her lungs to any great extent, she would not have lived. So fortunately, it did not do major lung damage. The problem was she was born so premature, and at that time they didn't have the medicine surfactant that helps babies' lungs open up. So it's a miracle she actually lived. The lung problems with prematurity can be for life. Asthma's possibility, but you can have long-term lung structural damage just from being premature. The skin problems she must have had early on must have been horrendous. Other issues with prematurity is they have to give oxygen, so she could easily have become blind. And hearing, obviously, because all her functions are potentially affected by not being the perfect environment that we were made by God Himself to develop inside our moms until we're ready to be born.
So you're in better shape than many people who were not aborted.
Than most, yeah, absolutely. And I think some people struggle with that when they see me or they hear my story. They start to go, that can't be true. Look at her. She looks perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. If we say that, then people know something about abortion, because they're coming to me with this preconceived notion that I should be somehow deformed, terribly unhealthy. That says something about abortion.
After learning about her history as an abortion survivor, Melissa contacted some of the nurses and doctors who took care of her at St. Luke's Hospital. She had a chance to meet one of the nurses a few years later, and a comment she made shocked Melissa.
We had corresponded back and forth all these years, and so I just had questions for her about what she knew when I arrived at the hospital and what kind of care I received. She took me on a tour of the neonatal facility, and of course it's far beyond anything it was back then, but it was a great piece of closure, I think, for me to see where I had been cared for. But even though I had had this relationship with that nurse all this time, she even said to me, Melissa, sometimes I don't know that this can be true, because I don't understand why they saved your life. For a nurse to say that, even though she knew that that was the pretense under which I came in, she was still struggling with the fact that they saved my life, because they've said I was a liability. It would have been much easier to just let me die.
And so many have before you and after you.
Absolutely. Like I said, I owe those doctors and nurses my life.
While Melissa's story of surviving an abortion is incredible, she's not alone. Over the years, there have been several cases of babies surviving saline abortions. As the St. Luke's nurse said, Melissa could have been a liability for the hospital. As a result of these unwanted survivors, abortionists have had to invent new late-term abortion procedures. Dr. Taylor discussed them, some of which are still being used today.
So then they switched to a procedure where they actually dismember the child before the baby's delivered, piece by piece, with pliers.
What is that procedure called?
I believe that's the D&E.
Which stands for?
Dilation and extraction.
So explain to me the procedure.
This one, unfortunately, is also very brutal. They dilate the cervix, which is a potential for future problems in their next baby's life and pregnancy. And they break the bag, reach in, grab a piece of body, and twist it off.
So the baby literally is dismembered in the womb?
Torn apart inside the womb to be delivered. And this is usually after 20 plus 24 weeks.
I understand that then partial birth abortion was also introduced to perhaps alleviate the problems of dismembering the baby?
There's a lot of money involved in abortion, and they wanted to get everybody possible to be able to accommodate anybody up until full-term birth. So this is a brutal procedure where they deliver the body first, reach in, pull the legs out, and then so that the baby's not delivered alive, they stab it in the back of the brain. And there have been children that have lived from this, though a lot fewer, and unfortunately the cases you read on that are just horrendous.
You know, it's a love story. And I think whenever I meet people who are adopted, they have similar stories to tell. And mine is no different. My adoptive parents fell in love with me when they first laid eyes on me, and I always like to joke around. You know, my mother always says that I was the most beautiful baby she's ever seen, and I've seen pictures of myself. I don't think I was beautiful. I was scrawny. My head was shaved because I couldn't suck from a bottle. You know, I was a weak child, but they thought I was beautiful. And my mom always tells the story of the first time she held me, she knew that I was going to be okay. And that's love.